Thank you for joining. This presentation is about marine biosecurity planning for Guernsey. My name is Julia Henney and I'm the Senior Natural Environment Officer at the States of Guernsey. And this presentation is going to run through a bit of an introduction as to what we are up to in relation to marine biosecurity, why we prioritise biosecurity in the marine environment, the objectives of a marine biosecurity plan, what makes effective biosecurity, and then finally the end products that have been produced through this process. So starting off with a bit of an introduction, back in 2023, the States of Guernsey adopted an invasive non-native species action plan. And this action plan aimed to turn invasive species management on its head in the island. So rather than focusing on controlling those species that are already here and already causing a problem, we instead look to try and prevent them from arriving in the first place. I'll go into a bit more detail about why that's so important, but in essence, it really is the most cost-effective way. Invasive non-native species are one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss globally. They also have significant economic impacts and sometimes impacts to health and social problems as well. And these are all impacts that we are experiencing locally in Guernsey. And our marine industries and ecosystems are also at risk from things like pests and diseases that are often transmitted along the same pathways as invasive non-native species. So when we're looking at marine biosecurity planning, we're looking at invasive non-native species, pests and diseases. So I'll start by giving you some examples of this species is already here in the marine environment and already causing problems. And this is Japanese wireweed. So this is an invasive non-native seaweed. It came from Japan originally, and it grows in these really tall, very long columns. It shades out rock pools, but it also can cause some social problems. So I don't know if you've ever been swimming or snorkeling around our coast, but you can sometimes feel it wrapping around your legs or your equipment, which is quite unpleasant. But worse than that, it can also wrap around props and cause quite bad fouling. It was first introduced to Guernsey in the 1980s, and it's now widespread across all bays in Guernsey. It's really well established and unfortunately in a lot of our most important sites as well, such as our Ramsar sites. And unfortunately, there is no effective means to control or manage this seaweed. And in fact, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that suggests trying to control it, so like physically remove it, can actually exacerbate the problem, and it can release little propagules and it can spread further and faster. So sometimes, trying to manage invasive species can actually make the problem worse. Another example is a more recent arrival to Guernsey, and this is carpet sea squirt, often called Devex, or its other common name is sea vomit, which is a very descriptive name for it. And if it becomes really well established, it does look exactly like that, like vomit that it drips off infrastructure. This was first detected in Guernsey in 2023, but it's restricted to a single location as far as we can tell. And every year we go out and we monitor it. So we do surveys to find it, and then we physically remove colonies as well as a control measure. And that control actually appears to be working so far. We've done it every year since 2023. And last year, following the removal of colonies in the spring, we then follow that up with water testing to try and detect the DNA of this species in the water. And when we did that last summer, it was actually below detectable levels. It's unlikely that we've successfully eradicated it because that is almost impossible, but we do think that control measure is working, which is great because for most marine invasives, there just isn't any means of control. And then there are also invasive species and pests and diseases that aren't here yet, that haven't made it to our shores and that we really want to keep out. One such example is oyster herpes virus. So this is a disease caused by a pathogen that impacts oysters. This isn't in our island. We have so it's a notifiable disease through our animal health legislation, and we have a certified disease-free status for this, which is really important because our aquaculture facilities here rely on that. So there are two companies over here, one in Herm, which has to be the most picturesque place, I think, for an oyster farm, and there's another seed farm as well. And if it were to get to either of those to those facilities, it would likely result in a 90% mortality of their stock, which would have huge financial implications, as well as the significant management implications as well of trying to keep that disease out if it made its way to our island. So we really want to keep it out. It is present in Jersey, in the coast of France, all around the coast of the UK. So we really are quite unique in that disease-free status, which up to now might have largely been down to luck, but we're looking to introduce biosecurity measures that will really reduce that risk of it being introduced so that we can safeguard those industries. So why do we prioritise biosecurity? So this is in line with the hierarchy of management for invasive species, where we want to prevent a species from being transported and entering a new environment. If a species is introduced into an area, we want to ensure then it can be readily identified and that we can respond rapidly to control it or eradicate it if at all possible. And then we can prevent it from actually establishing. In the marine environment, controlling or eradicating a species is technically very, very difficult. In most cases, it's impossible, but also, even if we undertake control measures, they can be very, very costly. So we really do need to prioritise prevention, and especially in the marine environment. Furthermore, prevention is much less costly than controlling the species, because once it's already here, it's already established, and all those associated impacts are also being realised. So because of that, and because of the difficulty in the marine environment, we prioritise the production of a marine biosecurity plan to really look at how we can reduce those risks. So there were three main objectives of this plan. Yeah, the first, as I've said, is to reduce the risk of introduction and spread of invasive species, pests and diseases. The second one looked to establish optimum surveillance for monitoring, detection and rapid response. So that's making sure that if a species does get to our island, we can find it quickly, we can then act on it quickly, and we're more likely to be able to control or eradicate it. As we're seeing with DVEX, you know, those control methods only work because we caught it early. And then the final objective was to look at whether we could develop an effective control programme for existing invasive species, pests or diseases. So following a tender process, this work was contracted out to APEM, and they were then engaged to produce this marine biosecurity plan. And they were tasked with producing something that can address these risks through both government interventions, such as policy, infrastructure, legislation, and also through stakeholder biosecurity actions. Their approach focused on three core pillars, and they're all needed, all three of them, to achieve effective biosecurity plan. So the first is the sort of standard biosecurity measures that you might expect to see, robust cleaning actions, you know, making sure the hull of your vessel is clean, campaigns like Check, Clean, Dry that you might have heard about, really those practical actions that can physically reduce the risk of invasive species from arriving or spreading around our waters. But aligned with those actions, we also need effective monitoring and evidence. So we need to make sure that there is good surveillance, that when a species is reported, there is an effective channel for that report to go through, and that it reaches the right people or the right organisation in a timely manner so it can be acted on. And then the third core pillar here is around awareness and engagement. So it is about spreading awareness of the risks of invasive species, pests and diseases amongst our community and also to visitors, and also spreading awareness about what actions that you can take as a marine user to try and reduce those pathways. Underpinning all of these three core principles was really active consultation and engagement with stakeholders to ensure that so they held a series of workshops to discuss marine biosecurity and the options that we might want to include in a marine biosecurity plan, so that we could incorporate the views of marine stakeholders and make sure that any recommendations were practical, that they had buy-in from the community, and they were actually, you know, they could be actioned. So we had input from a wide range of marine users from all different pathways, so lots of different, you know, the means by which these species could enter our waters. So there were recreational water users, representatives of commercial industries as well, so shipping, agriculture and fishing. And then there were also internal workshops held as well to make sure that those recommendations for the States of Guernsey were also achievable and realistic. Now, the result of these exercises and lots of other discussions and engagement, that was all used to inform the production of 2 documents. So the first is an internal technical report for the States of Guernsey, and the second is a public-facing marine biosecurity guide for Guernsey. And both of these documents were produced with the intention of complementing and supporting each other. So, you know, one doesn't work without the other, but they both have measures in there which are complementary. So just a little bit of information on the technical report. So this is intended for sort of top-down implementation by the States of Guernsey. It's a technical report for policymakers and government departments, and it comprised of a review of legislation and policy. So what is currently in place in Guernsey, and then what is in place in other jurisdictions that might work for Guernsey. And then there was a series of recommendations from that as to what policy or legislative changes might be needed in order to meet, say, international best practice or international conventions, such as like the Ballast Water Convention or the Convention on Biological Diversity. The second stage was a recommendation for contingency planning and rapid response protocols. So how would we actually respond in the event of an incursion of a high-risk marine invasive species or pest or disease, and how can that be implemented? Thirdly, we looked at species prioritisation. So I mentioned there about high-risk species. Yeah, not all species are made equally, and some pose a lot higher risk than others. So it's about prioritising our resources and monitoring and controlling those species that pose the highest risk. Both in prevention, but also we talked about if they're already here, is there any option for control and management as well? And then finally, all of these recommendations were summarised into a potential implementation plan. So this technical report is being reviewed and being carried forward by an internal working group. And the second output then is this public-facing marine biosecurity guide, which is provides recommendations for marine users as to the practical actions that they can take to reduce their risk of introducing marine invasive non-native species. And it focuses on these 2 core messages. So the first is check, clean, dry. So it's really about sort of, you know, checking your equipment, checking your boats, your vessels, cleaning them to make sure that they aren't heavily fouled, or you've not got any invasive species hiding in any little nooks and crannies, and then drying your equipment as thoroughly as possible before moving it to another site or allowing it to re-enter the water. And then the second key message here is around stop the spread. So this is sort of to help people consider not only moving from one jurisdiction to another, but also the risk of spreading invasive species around Guernsey's waters. So this public guide has just been launched. It was launched in the spring, and you can find it online at gov.gg/marine biosecurity. But off the back of this as well, there's also been a number of other outputs for marine users. So there is a recreational boating guide as well. So if you own a boat, please do check out that guide. You can find it at all of the public harbour offices and a lot of the other sort of places that you might visit, like the yacht clubs. And within here, yeah, as I mentioned, there's a lot of guidance, and we've gone down and produced sector-specific guidance as well. So I mentioned there the recreational boaters leaflet, so recommending things like cleaning your vessel hull regularly, checking your warps and chains and ropes for debris before you stow them away, washing down the anchor warp. And then be especially careful when you're travelling in or out of Guernsey, because that's when you can transport marine invasives to new areas. If you're a recreational angler, some of the advice that we provide for you is, again, checking, cleaning and drying your equipment, but also things like if you're using live bait, you know, try not to, or make sure that it's not an invasive species or not been brought in from outside of Guernsey. And there's this guidance, sector-specific guidance for lots of different marine users, commercial shipping, commercial anglers, paddlers, kayakers, surfers. So please do check out that guide and that sort of specific guidance that has been drafted. And then there's also some broader guidance as well there for all industries. So as I talked about before, those 3 core pillars, this is picking up those other 2 core pillars. So there's some guidance there around monitoring and reporting. So what you can do as a marine user to help keep your eyes peeled for marine invasive species. And if you think that you've spotted one or you've spotted something unusual, the reporting mechanisms for that. And then there's also information there about raising awareness as well. So this is especially relevant if you happen to run a club or a society that uses the marine environment. Yeah, we'd love it if you would engage with that and help share the messaging around marine biosecurity. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. If you have any questions, I can be contacted directly, or yeah, as I've said, there is a lot more information online at gov.gg/marine biosecurity. Thank you.